Imagine a time when women had little to no control over anything in their society. They had little control over their body and were left with few defenses against the large forces that attempted to oppress them.
This time was not as long ago as you may think. From the early 60s to the late 80s, a movement called second wave feminism took place, and it helped the furtherment of women's rights.
In this film, we will show you the brave women and the things that they have accomplished that have changed the way women are treated today.
Second wave feminism was the first time in American history women took a stand for what they believed in. The first time was first wave feminism. This is when they took a stand for women's suffrage and women's property rights. The second time around, during second wave feminism, they decided to focus more on a broader span of topics, such as women's sexuality rights, family rights, the workplace rights, reproductive rights, and de facto inequalities. The two waves are different, that's evident, but why they are different is the interesting part. American lives, for middle-class white people at least, seem perfect and content, but things are never as they seem.
Women were told through social influences that if they had a clean home, happy, healthy children, the result of the baby boom, and all the latest clothes and appliances, then they should be happy.
Many women had all of this and more, and still weren't content with the way their lives were. A lot of them held jobs during World War II while the men were away, and they had a taste of social influence. But when the men returned, the women took a step back into the home. By this time, a lot of women had had enough and were ready, slowly but surely, to take a stand for themselves. There were many influential factors to the awakening of the second wave of feminism. One very important factor was a book called The Feminine Mystique. This book was written by Betty Friedan, who over the next 2 decades helped to influence and organize many movements within the second wave of feminism. Now, Betty Friedan wrote this book to be very brutally honest about what the housewives were thinking during this time and about the depression they were feeling often. Now, for those of you who haven't read The Feminine Mystique, there's one very important quote in it that can sum up the tone of the entire book.
Each suburban wife struggles with it alone, as she made the bed, shopped for groceries, matched slip-covered material, ate peanut butter sandwiches with her children, chauffeured Cub Scouts and brownies, lay beside her husband at night. She was afraid to even ask herself the silent question, is this all?
This book, along with depression in many and the need for women to return to the workplace so they can create a more meaningful societal work, led to encouragement for the second wave of feminism to start up. Second wave feminists had a huge task ahead of them. They had to influence social mindset of everyone in society into a more positive view of women, which would influence de facto or social separation changes all across America. This next section is about how the second wave feminists acted and reacted over the next 20 years.
In 1963, the Equal Pay Act and later the Fair Labor Standards Act became law, making sure everyone in the workforce got paid the same amount for the same job. Also in 1963, The Feminine Mystique was published. Betty Friedan left a lasting impact with this book, as it is still quoted and looked highly upon today. In 1964, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 kept sex, race, nationality, and creed from being a determining factor in employment. In 1965, the U.S. Supreme Court case, Griswold v. Connecticut, struck down the only remaining state law banning the use of contraceptives by married couples, which, of course, is still in action today. This court case helped encourage even married women to join the feminist cause. In the case of Weeks v. Southern Belle, marked a major triumph in the fight against restrictive labor laws and company regulations on the hours and conditions of women's work in the U.S., opening many previously male-only jobs to women. In 1966, 28 women, including Betty Friedan, founded NOW, the National Organization for Women. In 1969, NARAL Pro-Choice America, then called the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws, was founded. This was 4 years before Roe v. Wade, paving the way for that historical legacy to occur. Also in 1969, California adopted a no-fault divorce law, allowing couples to divorce by mutual consent. In 1970, the Women's Strike for Equality, organized by Betty Friedan, was held on the 50th anniversary of women's suffrage. In 1972, 2 feminist leaders, Gloria Steinem and Letty Pogbrun, co-founded Miss Magazine. Their goal was to encourage women to have a higher self-worth and to not let anyone, even magazines, put them down. And the Feminist Women's Health Center was founded in Los Angeles by Carol Downer and Lorraine Rothman. In 1973, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in Roe v. Wade that laws prohibiting abortion are unconstitutional. In 1975, Joan Little, who was raped by a guard while in jail, was acquitted of murdering her offender. The case established a precedent in America for killing as self-defense against rape. In 1977, the first National Women's Conference was held in Houston, Texas, to try and pass a plan of action.
These events, combined with the passionate emotions of the majority of women, allowed for the strong second wave of feminism to occur that would last with Americans for the decades to come.
The majority of women did not see themselves as anything more than a typical housewife. They believed they were only good for doing chores, and they were owned by their husbands. And during this time, a divorce was never heard of. All most women needed was an outlet to a better opportunity. In 1960, 38% of American women working usually worked jobs such as teachers, nurses, and secretaries. Although this was the typical life, some women began to think they could be so much more. Keeping all this in mind, the intent of the second wave was for equality. The original goal was to end workplace discrimination. But even with the addition of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, equality for women in the workplace still needed to be further addressed. In addition, activists wanted both political and personal equality. Examples of personal and political equality include their relationships, birth control and abortion, clothing, body image, maternity leave, daycare, and roles in their marriage. To change these circumstances, activists had to get their voices heard. Even within the movement, there was a great divide between upper and middle class, young and old, conservative and radical. But even with these circumstances, their voices were able to be heard through protest. Groups like NOW and ERA arranged many of these protests, and protests like these were the building blocks for becoming successful. Other women like Kate Milton, Shulamith Firestone, and Emma Goldman helped influence the movement. On the contrary, as protesters were debating on equal gender rights, African American women were focusing on both racial and gender equality. These issues were addressed by women like Michelle Wallace, Marion Weathers, Bell Hooks, Alice Walker, and Bettina Apteker.
Go.
Women during this time worked hard to gain what they needed: freedom and equality for the oppressed. Many of these influences have contributed to leading this movement. Many people and organizations have had to put in a lot of time for this movement to be a success. People like Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinman, and Germaine Greer have led protesters through their writings and media attention. With the ability to access media attention, they are able to reach farther audiences, which include other countries where women were also protesting. These leaders represented a different kind of feminist, because the media portrayed feminists as women who were ugly, men-hating, and humorless. Most leaders were diverse and unique. Also, writings like Miss Women magazine and the Feminine Mystique were used to help guide and encourage fighters during the protest. These writings were used to show the beliefs and wants of the movement to the world.
The legacy of second wave feminism started with legal strides in gender discrimination, equal pay amendments, and further rights to their own bodies. The executive order for affirmative action started equality for women in the workplace, which is still in force. The military and other so-called boys' clubs now have equal hiring opportunities. Gender is no longer a determining factor. The best person for the job, be they male or female, is the one awarded. With decisions like Roe v. Wade, women were given the right to terminate their pregnancy. Although this is a hot topic in the USA, this is still an option for women. The introduction of marital rape laws ensured women an independence from their husbands they had not previously had. Now all 50 states recognize marital rape. During the era of second wave feminism, rape crisis centers and battered women's shelters were established. Now, rape crisis centers and battered women's shelters are more readily available. The National Organization for Women was founded. The organization still widely exists. Changes were made in divorce laws and child custody laws that are still in policy. The feminist mystique is still widely read as relevant feminist literature. The denial of the Equal Rights Amendment did have a lasting legacy. Although it did not pass, it did not stop the wide range of actions that still impact modern society. This is not to say that men and women are treated as complete equals. We, as a society, are still striving for that. But women are certainly in a better and more equal place than they were 50 years ago.
Second wave feminism has certainly made an impact on the women of today.
Women have reaped the benefits of the rights women fought so hard to get.
Now that we are in the third wave of feminism, we hope that one day women will look back and see the strides we are making today.